Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'd like to talk about a topic in epistemology known as Fitch's paradox of knowability, or the knowability paradox. The knowability principle, that every truth is in principle knowable, combined with standard modal and epistemic principles, yields a surprising result. If all truths are knowable, then all truths are known. So somehow we get this collapse from for all propositions P, if P is true, then P is knowable. From this we can prove that for all propositions P, if P is true, then it is the case that P is known. Fitch's paradox of knowability, first proved by Frederick Fitch in 1963, it shows that a seemingly modest epistemic thesis collapses into omniscience. Here are some epistemic theses on truth and knowability. First, we have realism, that there exist unknowable truths. Next, we have anti-realism, or the knowability thesis, that all truths are in principle knowable. And lastly, we have omniscience, that all truths are indeed known. We're going to show that the second option, the knowability thesis, collapses into the third, omniscience. Before we begin, I'd like to talk about some modal and epistemic principles. First, we have necessitation, that if a proposition P is provable, then necessary P is provable. Next, we have possibility duality. From necessary, not the case P, we can prove or derive not the case possible P. Next, we have our epistemic principles. First, we have distribution of knowledge. From the conjunction P and Q are known, we can prove or derive that each of the conjuncts are known. So from P and Q are known, we can derive that P is known and Q is known. And lastly, we have factivity, that if a proposition P is known, then we can prove or derive that P is true. Here are some additional assumptions for the proof. The first is the knowability principle, that for all propositions P, if P is true, then P is knowable. And for reductio, we have non-omniscience, that there exists a proposition P where P is true, and it's not the case that P is known. Okay, so here's the goal. We aim to prove the following. For all propositions P, if P is true, then P is knowable, we will prove that for all propositions P, if P is true, then P is known. We will show that the knowability thesis collapses into omniscience. Let's begin the proof. First, we have the knowability principle, that for all propositions P, if P is true, then P is knowable. Next, suppose for reductio there exists an unknown truth. There exists a proposition P where P is true, and it's not the case that P is known. For step 3, we're just instantiating that proposition. So let P be arbitrary, such that P is true and it's not the case that P is known. For step 4, we're just applying the knowability principle to that proposition. And so we have that this proposition is knowable. Next, we have an inner reductio. Suppose for reductio, it is the case this proposition is known. By distribution of knowledge, each of the conjuncts are known. By conjunction elimination, we have that P is known. And it's not the case that P is known is known. By factivity, that gives us it's not the case that P is known. And so by lines 8 and 10, we derive a contradiction. Of course, contradictions are trivially false. And so by negation introduction, we have that it's not the case this proposition is known. The inner assumption is discharged, and we continue our proof. From the inner reductio, we proved that it's not the case this proposition is known. By necessitation, it's necessarily the case. by possibility duality, this proposition is not knowable. However, previously on line 5, we derived that it is possible to know this proposition. So by lines 5 and 16, we derive a contradiction. Of course, contradictions are trivially false. So by negation introduction, it's not the case that there's a proposition that's true, and it's not the case that proposition is known. We discharge the outer assumption. The knowability principle together with non-omniscience results in contradiction. By universal generalization, we have that for all propositions P, it's not the case that a proposition P is true, and it's not the case that proposition is known. By De Morgan's laws, we get this. And by double negation elimination, we now have this, that for all propositions P, it's not the case P is true or P is known. By material implication equivalence, we now have that for all propositions P, if P is true, then it is the case that P is known. And that's our conclusion. All true propositions are known. Under some very modest modal and epistemic assumptions, if all truths are knowable, then all truths are known. Equivalently, if there exist unknown truths, then there exist unknowable truths. Here, moderate anti-realism, which is the knowability thesis, collapses into omniscience. If you would like to read more about this topic, see the entry on Fitch's Paradox of Knowability in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.